NK News has launched a new app that makes staying updated on all things North Korea easier than ever. The app gives access to the latest articles so you'll never miss a breaking story. It's fast, convenient, and designed with readers in mind. Our team is dedicated to bringing you the most accurate and insightful information about North Korea with content and analysis unavailable elsewhere. Don't delay. Download the NK News app from Apple's App Store or Google Play and stay connected with the latest North Korea news and analysis. The app also works with NK Pro subscriptions, offering full access to NK Pro content. Hello listeners and welcome to the NK News podcast. I'm your host, Jacko Zwetsloot, and joining me here in the studio today, Tuesday the 16th of January, is my colleague Shreyas Reddy. Shreyas, welcome back on the show.
Great to be here.
Well, we've got a big story to talk about, and this is following on from December 31st speech by Kim Jong-un, in which he said that we're not interested in unification with South Korea anymore. So you've written a big story just yesterday, big article, why North Korean websites are suddenly vanishing from the internet. What's vanishing?
Pretty much started off with everything that North Korea has traditionally used to target South Koreans and Koreans living overseas. So specifically, began last Thursday when we spotted a bunch of propaganda websites going down all at once. So some quite fairly prominent sites, DPRK Today, Uri Minjokri, Arirang Meari, a few others that very much have a focus on South Korea, unification themes and all. And I think if that kind of started snowballing into other steps as well. We started seeing organizations dealing with inter-Korean matters getting shut down. We saw radio stations that broadcast into South Korea stop airing. And on the whole, we've also seen a bunch of other minor changes here. They're just, in general, saying unification is not quite on the table. But beyond that, we've also seen a few signs that North Korea is extending that to social media. It's not just the websites, it's not just the traditional media outlets like radio channels. We're seeing over the past decade, they've evolved their social media strategy a lot. And some of the more recent ventures that were perhaps not just South Korea facing, but even globally focused in some ways, those also started disappearing. So at this point, we're looking and saying, it might have started with South Korea, but could this evolve into something more?
Could the websites going offline not have been a result of attacks or hacks or jamming by the South Korean government?
I think certainly it doesn't seem to be a targeted attack. We've had a cybersecurity researcher whom we often work with when it comes to North Korea's internet activity, looked into it, and he said that essentially all the propaganda websites that went down in the same way. The domains existed, there were no server errors. It just looked like they were turned off, and as far from where he was standing, it looked deliberate. And in the wider context, that also appears to be the same. And the fact that since then, it's gone beyond the websites, it has gone to other forms of media, it has gone to social media platforms that the South Korean government has no control over.
Right. Although, I mean, it does have... I have noticed trying to look at some North Korean-controlled Twitter accounts in the last few weeks that actually South Korea can request a Twitter to block some Twitter accounts in this country. But you're saying that it's not it's the actual accounts have gone down.
It can request them to block them in this country, but not necessarily overall. In some cases, there might be cases you can make a case for perhaps spreading misinformation files, something to say this should not be there. But Twitter certainly does not have as strong policies on that as, say, YouTube, which has been deleting a lot of North Korea-related propaganda channels over the past year or two.
Right. Okay. So we've got Twitter accounts are down, Flickr, Weibo, which is the Chinese version of Twitter, I guess, is it?
It's kind of
social media.
It's got a lot. I think you can say Twitter equivalent, but it has a lot of its own functionality as well.
And Bilibili, which I'd never even heard of before reading your article.
Yeah.
So they're all down. And some of these, you're also mentioning sock puppet accounts run by the Sogwang Media Corporation. Just remind us who Sogwang Media Corporation is and where they fit into the picture.
So it is a state-run media corporation based out of Pyongyang, but they've had a lot of influence in North Korea's external propaganda over the last few years. They had their own propaganda site, but that frankly was already inactive to some extent even before this began. Mostly what they have been doing is they've been overseeing different kinds of campaigns, including, so these sock puppet accounts, what they do is these are accounts that portray themselves as average people, average citizens, maybe third-party observers who have nothing to do with North Korea, a combination of a lot of different trends. And inevitably, what they do is they try and portray North Korea as a normal place to live,
Right.
even a good place to live,
Yeah.
and in some cases try to challenge outside perceptions and outside reports of what life is like in North Korea. And the goal is always to say, oh, look, this isn't the state narrative. This is just an ordinary person. But inevitably, when you dig into these, you end up finding connections to the state. Usually, the people who are hosting these, is there the Pyongyang residents who are on camera and showing what they're doing. You more often than not, they're from elite families, some with close ties to the very top of North Korea's hierarchy, and the ones which are more anonymous, which, for example, their Twitter forays, where it was just photos of life in North Korea, inevitably rosy scenes of a happy life.
Yeah.
Those ones, there's no real person in front of the camera, and there's no one whom so it's essentially could be just handled anywhere from even the Sogwang office.
Right, and Sogwang, as we understand it, is run by the current the wife of the current DPRK ambassador to Beijing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so very much in the elite rings of power in North Korea. So how do we? Wait on before we go on. What about the websites of KCNA or the Rodong Shinmun? Are they still up?
Oh yeah. So North Korea's official state, top-level state media outlets, they're still active. They're still, what essentially is going on so far is they have mostly taken out these minor propaganda sites. I say minor, but they've played an important role in the past at times, but they're not formally controlled by Pyongyang. In fact, most of these sites are hosted outside North Korea. Many of the propaganda sites that went down were in China, one in Germany, but the official North Korean websites, the domains, they're usually hosted straight out of Pyongyang. So those are still active. That's where the top-level messaging will come through. So KCNA, Rodong Shinmun, Minju Joseon, the newspapers, KCTV, and the main radio station, the Korean Central Broadcasting Station, which I should point out is distinct from Pyongyang Radio, one of the radio stations that targeted South Korea and has gone down.
So these sites that remain up, have they shown changes that exhibit this new policy? Have they removed things about unification or South Korea, for example?
Yeah, so obviously, so these top-level media outlets, that wasn't necessarily their focus to begin with, but for most of them anyway. But we've seen a few sites like Naenara, which is the official North Korean web portal, and Minju Joseon, the cabinet-run newspaper. So both their websites essentially removed content related to unification. So in the case of Naenara, they had a section on the principles of unification, and they had songs about reunification. Gone. Minju Joseon had a section about unification. Gone. And with that's something that essentially also began before the propaganda sites were deleted. A couple of them, Uri Minjokri and Ryomyong, had material related to unification taken down. Of course, now the sites are gone altogether, so it's all moot, but the process was already underway.
What's happened to the Tongil Shinbo?
Yeah, so
the unification newspaper.
So that's an interesting case because we've been trying to monitor that. Now the problem with the Tongil Shinbo is it only comes out internationally in a print version. So a PDF copy available through North Korean distribution channels, which are posted out of Japan. And the last edition, it's a weekly newspaper, but the last one was released on January 6th. So essentially, we should have had one on the 13th.
Yes.
We haven't yet seen one. But at the same time, we also haven't received new print editions of other newspapers like Pyongyang Times, the English language weekly newspaper.
Right.
But at the same time, we know that Pyongyang Times is still operating because their website is still updating. It's just that Tongil Shinbo does not have a website, and so we're not seeing that. But even before that, we did see content related to Tongil Shinbo being taken off the propaganda sites that are no longer active.
So, I mean, how do we zoom out and look at this? What does this all mean? What are some of the specialists in North Korean media monitoring saying about all this?
Well, I think certainly perspectives vary. There have been some fears in certain quarters that this might be the worst case scenario. What if North Korea goes completely dark? What if it just completely cuts itself off from the rest of the world, at least in terms of the internet and more accessible media? And you can see why that concern might be there, because I think let's not forget, North Korea's online messaging activities are still it's a relatively recent phenomenon, to be honest. A lot of it was started in later years of Kim Jong-il's rule, and then a lot of it was just taken to the next level by Kim Jong-un. So we saw the websites of KCNA and Rodong Shinmun turn up around the end of Kim Jong-il's tenure, and then under Kim Jong-un, more websites popped up. Social media activity proliferated. They started experimenting formats, different content. So I think there's that concern that, Kim Jong-un might now look back and say, we didn't actually need to open up. It was fine. But I think for the most part, the people we've spoken to look at it and say, this situation is not what it once was. Even back then, frankly, it's not like North Korea was completely dark. It had a wire service, which it used to communicate with the outside world. Sometimes other forms of material did slip out of North Korea, but obviously without the internet it was harder. And even through the Japan-based affiliates, there used to be KCNA updates on a Japanese-hosted website even in the 2000s. So it's not like they will completely go back to the dark ages, I think most people would say. And frankly, at this point, they've also learned that, maybe you don't need to put everything out there. Maybe you don't need to put all the messaging out there, especially matters related to unification, which they're now striking out of their agenda. But it's still good to have some top-level outlets, some channels of communication with which they can send a message to the outside world. And that message could be anything from condemnation of US, South Korean, Japanese activities to advertising their latest weapons development and saying, look how strong we are. So they'd still want to maintain some sort of channels, and most likely that will be the KCNA, KCTV, Rodong Shinmun, Korean Central Broadcasting Station kind of outlets. Those ones will be there. As for their other, shall we say, slightly lower level outlets or alternate forms of communication like social media, we've seen, and where we stand right now is North Korea has essentially put a hard reset on its external messaging strategy.
Yeah, it does look like, at least at the moment, Kim Jong-un is not interested in the persuasive aspect of North Korean messaging. He's not interested in convincing South Koreans or members of the Korean diaspora, whether in the United States or Japan or China, that we're the better Korea, I'm the better leader, you should follow us.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think perhaps there's also this possibility that they're realizing North Korea's even if they've embraced new means of the past decade, their material was pretty much the same as it was in the Cold War. It hasn't, their approach, apart from the sock puppet accounts and a few other exceptions, they haven't really modernized their messaging. And so now, if they're shutting everything down, it's just as easily a chance for them to revamp how they communicate with the outside world, what messages they send. So I think we'll have to wait and watch, see what comes next. But I think we shouldn't rule out the possibility that they may bring some of these things back. Maybe not necessarily with a unification focus. If they're saying that is out, that could always change. You never say never, but certainly the level, the thoroughness and the speed with which they've acted, they seem quite sure about what they're doing on that front. But will they want to completely cut themselves off from the outside world in terms of sending messages out there? Unlikely. I think there is a certain base out there for them, and there are purposes for which they could do with being able to broadcast out. And I think maybe at some point we may see some new form, if not the old forms just coming back with some tweaks.
I'm curious to see whether North Korea starts its leafleting campaigns again, which it did almost consistently from 1950 until the Olympic rapprochement of 2018 with a short break in between. I think that could be a way to go back to the old methods without having to use internet. But We'll see. I mean, they did threaten to do that in the latter period of Moon Jae-in's administration. Remember, they actually printed a bunch of leaflets and showed a photograph of blocks of these leaflets ready to be put on balloons and sent to South Korea. Never actually happened.
Yeah.
It's always a tool that they could go back to. Is there anything happening this week or next week that we should be paying attention to that might give us some answers as to how North Korea is changing its messaging?
Absolutely. So, we're speaking on Tuesday. Yesterday, Monday, North Korea's Supreme People's Assembly, essentially a rubber stamp parliament, but still an important body, convened for its session. We don't know how long it lasts, how long this session will last, but it usually lasts a couple of days. So chances are by the time this podcast goes out, we'll have a full report on everything that's come out.
Right.
But from the opening day, we've already seen indications that there are some big changes in the offing. Kim Jong-un made a speech in which he essentially said that North Korea will change its constitution to ensure that North Koreans learn that South Korea is the number one enemy nation. And this isn't necessarily about, the emphasis is on what you say in terms of education, how you inform people, but that is a big measure. They've also, in the past, so in the Supreme People's Assembly, they've gone and dismantled 3 prominent organizations that deal with inter-Korean cooperation, including the Committee for the Peaceful Reunification of the Country, which has always been a significant inter-Korean organ from the north side. And they've also dismantled a few other slightly lesser organizations in the past week. So we're seeing these changes. And incidentally, he also talked in a speech about demolishing the Arch of Reunification in Pyongyang, which is a very prominent monument there.
Wow. Okay. Gosh, a lot of things to look out for. So listeners, do keep up with the latest news on nknews.org. Shreyas, thanks for coming in today and giving us the latest news. After this break, I'll be interviewing James Heenan of the United Nations Office for the High Commissioner on Human Rights to talk about the human rights situation in North Korea. So stay tuned. Ever been sidelined when it comes to understanding South Korea at an important meeting, conference, or discussion? You won't be if you become a member of Korea Pro, your one-stop solution to staying updated with the latest in South Korea's politics, society, economy, and foreign relations. Picture this: every morning you wake up to a newsletter that gives you a full aggregation of all the top news and analysis. It's handcrafted by the producers of NK Pro and NK News, so you can trust it to save you time and keep you ahead of the news cycle. In addition, the Korea Pro Week Ahead newsletter flags upcoming conferences, events, and major diplomatic and business developments. And of course, there's in-depth specialist analysis to keep you informed on the top issues of the day, which you won't find anywhere else. Korea Pro is produced by a wide range of specialists, including in-house analysts and external contributors. There are no ads or sponsored articles on Korea Pro. Unlike some of its South Korean competitors, Korea Pro provides hard-hitting and objective analysis without hidden agendas. For my listeners today, I've got something special. Use the coupon code PODCAST when you subscribe and get a 25% discount. Just head to koreapro.org/podcast. Use the coupon code PODCAST when you subscribe and get a 25% discount. Just head to koreapro.org/podcast. That's koreapro.org/podcast. Make the smart choice. Choose Korea Pro. Okay, and our long interview today is with James Heenan, who is the representative for the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Seoul. He's worked for human rights at the UN for 20 years, and his last position was in Palestine. He's also worked in numerous other places. You can find his office on Twitter at UN Rights Seoul. Welcome on the show, James.
Thanks, Joko. Great to be here.
So tell us a bit about your office in Seoul, what it does and what your role is.
Well, the office was set up after the Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in North Korea, which was about 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
We were set up with a very specific mandate to monitor the human rights situation and report on it in North Korea. But also we do other things. Most notably, we are charged with collecting information and evidence that might be used for eventual criminal prosecutions for crimes against humanity that were identified by this Commission of Inquiry I mentioned. We also do a lot of capacity building for civil society, for governments, for others, for victim-led associations.
Here in South Korea.
Here in South Korea, exactly.
Right.
But we also, one of our biggest tasks, of course, is just advocacy to keep the spotlight on what's happening in North Korea in human rights terms.
Has North Korea made any official comment on you or your office or its work?
Well, yes, they do regularly. They don't accept the mandate of our office. They don't accept mandates that they say are targeted against them. They had quite bellicose statements against our office when it first opened, I understand. Now it's still not a warm embrace, but certainly it's got a little bit more measured. I think they refer to me as the so-called head of the so-called office.
Ah, okay. How long have you been in that role now?
Just a little bit over a year.
All right. When I visited North Korea in 2010, they took us to a number of bookshops, and one of them had a report on human rights in South Korea that was published by the English name was something like the Investigation Committee for Human Rights Abuses in South Korea.
Right.
Something along those lines. And it was they'd published it in English, so they'd done an English translation of it, and it was, by the time I got it in 2010, it was already an old book. I think it had been published in the mid to late 1990s. Almost exclusively relying on reporting by South Korean left-wing newspapers and magazines. So it wasn't doing any reporting of its own. It was based on South Korean media. And I don't think the irony was apparent to the North Koreans when they published it, that they're publishing a report about South Korean human rights using South Korean sources to show human rights abuses in South Korea. I mean, I don't know how you would define that, but that seems like pretty close to the definition of what a democratic society should be, right? That you're able to report on your own abuses in your own society without fear of being killed or put in jail.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty basic to freedom of information and so forth. But
right.
Yeah, it's common in many countries. Yeah.
Is it part of your remit to also look at allegations of human rights abuses in South Korea? Because I can imagine that North Korea would say, well, why are you only looking at us? What about South Korea?
No, it's not. Our mandate is only on North Korea. But I work for an organisation that has a global mandate.
Yep.
The High Commissioner has a very broad mandate, which was established back just after the end of the Cold War. And so in the early 90s, it was a very happy time for human rights. And so he has a very broad mandate, essentially all human rights for all everywhere. So we do cover what's happening in South Korea, but it's covered from Geneva.
Right. Do you work together with Elizabeth Salmon, the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea?
Yes, Elizabeth is what we call a Special Rapporteur, an independent expert of the UN. We support her, so when she comes here on mission, we support her logistically and so forth. One of my staff members works full-time with her. But she has her independence, which she guards, and we have ours, which we guard as well. But clearly, we're both working on the same issues.
Has either of you travelled to the DPRK?
I don't think Elizabeth has, and I certainly haven't, no.
That must make your job difficult?
Well, it's frustrating. It's very odd to be sitting here in this hyper-modern city talking about very different reality, just 50 kilometres north of here. I mean, many people say that, but for us, it really is peculiar. It's not the only place in the world we have to do our work remotely. I mean, we should be in Pyongyang, but that's not going to happen just yet.
Do you think it's likely that you will go there for a visit before the end of your term?
I hope so. I don't think it's likely, but I would hope so. But like I said, we do this in other places. Our Syria team is outside Syria. Half of our Palestine team is outside Palestine. So it's human rights work is often at the sharper end of international relations. So we're often outside the country.
Now, almost 5 years ago, I talked to your predecessor in this position, Sina Paulson. That was already 5 years after the report of the Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea had come out. And so that's almost, as you said, almost 10 years since the report was issued. What is your assessment of the Commission and its report, looking back after a decade?
Well, the Commission itself was a global sort of aha moment. It seemed to be the time, and I was a little bit involved back then, it seemed to be the time when people just opened their eyes and saw the North Korean issue, or the Peninsula issue, not just one in terms of non-proliferation and security, but one in terms of human rights. So it was a groundbreaking Commission of Inquiry. We have many of these commissions of inquiry in the UN. In Palestine, where we worked before, we've had 8. But this one here really was a bit of a watershed moment. Now, since then, and that document remains our sort of a guidebook, our North Star in many ways. But since then, a lot has happened. And one of the messages I hear these days, as we are around the 10th anniversary, I hear some people saying, nothing's happened in the last 10 years. That's just not true. I mean, a lot has happened. Some people might say the only thing that needs to happen is a criminal prosecution of the North Korean leadership. Well, we need to be reasonable in our expectations, but a lot of hard work has been has taken place. Just as a matter of respect, particularly for those civil society organisations that work so hard in documenting and advocating for human rights in North Korea, bit of a disservice to them to say that nothing's happened. So my view is that a lot has happened. We have analysed the situation in much more depth, particularly legally. We've gathered a lot more information, gathered in human rights terms. Yeah, we have much higher visibility, particularly here in the Republic of Korea, but beyond. We have knowledge on behalf of the North Korean leadership that people are watching, which is probably 50% of human rights work around the world, is monitoring and documenting, puts people on notice that we're watching. And I think that's been effective. We've had some anecdotal stories that there have been some improvements in North Korea, and they've said because we know that we're being monitored.
The report has not been without its critics as to methodology and its conclusions, and a decade has passed since the original research was done. Do you think it stands up well?
Well, I mean, it was 10 years ago. The state of the art has advanced since then in terms of even the tools available to us to gather information have expanded exponentially, particularly technologically. I think in general terms, it still stacks up. I don't think that the typology of violations in DPRK changes that much. I think it is a systemic nature of it that makes it, I won't say unchanging, but very stable in those terms. Many other places we deal with, there's a country that all of a sudden descends into civil war, and then we and others come in, and you're dealing with a totally new environment. And whereas the basics of DPRK we've known for 70 years.
So you say that the abuses there are a feature of the system rather than a bug?
Well, certainly. Yeah, many of them are, absolutely. I mean, the lack of a right to privacy, the spying on neighbours, the inminban, the role of women in society, the use of political prison camps. Yeah, those things aren't just bugs, as you would say. It's integral parts of the system.
With the increase in technology that you referred to, and also you've said that there's been 8 commissions of inquiry in Palestine. Is it time for a new commission of inquiry into the DPRK and a new report?
Well, that's something for member states to decide, but I'm not sure what it would add at the moment because there are so many people working on monitoring and reporting on what's happening there.
Right, you've got the Transitional Justice Working Group, you've got NKDB, you've got other organisations also building up databases of allegations of abuse.
Yeah, so I think what many people feel is lacking is attention to the issue in the global geopolitical landscape, and that's something that's affecting everywhere.
Yeah.
In Palestine, where I was last, it was a key complaint that the Palestinian issue was being submerged by other issues, particularly Ukraine, for example. Well, now Palestine has certainly done something to rectify that, but there's a similar story here. So the question is, what do we do to bring attention back? I'm not sure another commission of inquiry is the way to go. And I also would say that 8 commissions of inquiry in Palestine, that's not normal. That shouldn't be like that. It's not that you just keep doing them every 10 years.
A few episodes ago, I interviewed an American academic, Jacob Reedhead, who had himself done some humanitarian work in North Korea back in the early 2000s and then sort of studied the discourse around human rights in North Korea and humanitarian work. And he said that his conclusions of his study were that the high watermark of interest in North Korean human rights was pretty much the time when the report came out. And since then, it's just been a steady tailing off for the last decade, that there's a sense either in Korea or in South Korea or globally that, well, we've done the report, that's all we can do for now. We've just got to wait until there's change in North Korea.
Well, it's not through want of people trying. I mean, if there is a lack of focus on human rights in North Korea, I mean, why is that? Who's responsible for that? I mean, ultimately, agendas are set by member states in particular. Yeah, they decide what are the key issues to talk about in negotiations and so forth. Certainly, civil society has been strong and loud on this issue ever since, so they've done what they can, and I think so has the United Nations in terms of the Secretariat, people like us. But it's part of the vagaries of geopolitical life, yeah. And the short attention span that people have means that as long as there's nothing in your face, and frankly, the COVID situation has maybe helped this because the drastic reduction of escapees from 1,000 or more a year down to about 60 or 70 means that there's less information, less human faces of what's going on. And if we're using information that's a few years old, then that's not going to get into the news cycle.
Do political swings in South Korea affect the degree to which it's on the agenda too?
Well, here certainly. I mean, it's the current government is very open to talking about, as it says, universal values in North Korea.
Right.
The previous government, I wasn't here, but I understand the previous government wasn't so much. But I mean, it's more than the Republic of Korea. We're talking globally. It's beyond that, and I don't think that's made any difference to the global attention.
Now, in August this year, Volker Turk, he's your boss, am I right?
He is, yes.
The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. He gave a briefing to the Security Council of the United Nations on human rights violations in the DPRK. And in his statement, he said that the people of the DPRK currently appear to be suffering from severe economic difficulty and severe repression of their rights. Could you comment on that?
Well, in that he was referring to the fact that this period of the COVID closures in particular, but building on the subsisting situation before, but the closures meant that there was economic difficulty because goods weren't crossing borders either way, and money in families' pockets, we know, as little as it was becoming even less. We also know that potentially as part of an increased repression, the markets, the Jungmadang, were being not totally closed down, but severely constrained. We know that was a coping mechanism for many people. So what he was referring to there was what we have understood, which is two things. People saying life has become much more difficult in economic terms for us and our families, but that's happened in the past. Life has become more difficult because of repression. We've had that in the past too, but we haven't necessarily had both things at the same time. Often when things are very difficult for the population, and you see this in many countries, the foot comes off the gas in terms of repression a bit, just a little bit of steam. What we understand is that you have both these phenomena happening at the same time, and that's leading people to feel as though they're in a fairly hopeless situation.
Are we seeing a level of malnutrition and starvation comparable to what we saw in the 1990s?
No, I don't think so, no.
Volker Turk also pointed to international human rights treaties and UN human rights bodies that provide, quote, a shared framework to identify challenges, address disagreements, and measure progress, thus helping to reduce tensions both within and between states, end quote. But the government of the DPRK has, as Mr. Turk says, cut itself off from these much-needed sources of dialogue. What can be done when a country cuts itself off from source of dialogue and continues to use economic resources to boost productions of weapons and satellites rather than take care of its people?
Well, this is an interesting phenomenon. I've spoken so far mostly about the sort of the harder end of our work, which is monitoring and accountability and so forth. But the UN always has an engagement approach. I mean, DPRK is a member state. It's one of essentially my board of governors, yeah?
Right.
So we always deal and work with member states, and DPRK is no exception to that. We meet with them, we try to work with them.
Not here in South Korea.
Not here, no, not my job is peculiar, but
right.
In Geneva and New York, we meet and we talk to them. Now, and in the past, there has been capacity building and technical assistance happening. Not a huge amount, but again, a number of member states also are in a similar situation. What the High Commission was talking about there was particularly in human rights terms, that the human rights framework, which is treaties and reporting on treaties and special rapporteurs, that framework is quite significant at the moment. And that provides an opportunity for a state to engage with the human rights machinery. DPRK doesn't reject the human rights framework. It accepts it. It plays its part. It's ratified 5 treaties, which is not the top of the class, but it's certainly not the bottom of the class. It's reported under them. It's continuing to report even this week to treaty bodies. So it is engaging with the system, and that has to be preserved. It engages with another process called a universal periodic review, where all member states turn up and get recommendations from other member states on the human rights situation. So for me, this is a bright spot that the DPRK continues to engage, and it says, we don't want to engage with parts of the system that just target us, like our office or the special rapporteur.
Right.
But if we're sitting all around the table multilaterally, fine, we're happy to be there. And again, DPRK is not the only country to take that approach. In fact, almost every country in the world takes that approach. Don't target me. If you try to target me, I'm not playing ball. So I'm not saying it's right. This is just the reality we've seen. So the engagement side of things is super important, and that's what the High Commissioner was talking about.
Can you tell us anything about what it's doing or expected to do this week?
No, well, what I meant was that the reporting under the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which is an area that DPRK is interested in, they have a report due, and they essentially have submitted that report. We weren't sure if they were actually going to send it in. They've just submitted it, and now the committee that oversees that treaty will schedule a date, maybe later in the year or later next year, And we'll have a dialogue. The government will turn up and answer questions about its track record on persons with disabilities.
I understand that's an area of human rights that North Korea has been willing to engage in after the publication of the report of the Commission of Inquiry 10 years ago.
Yes, one of a few, yeah.
And is that because it's kind of low-hanging fruit for North Korea? It's kind of an easy area to talk about?
I don't know why. It may be that it doesn't touch on certain vital interests, but it certainly is something that, along with some parts of the women's rights agenda and to an extent children, and also certainly to an extent climate change, that the government sees the need and the benefit of engaging with the international community.
You mentioned technical assistance, which Volker Turk also talked about in his statement to the Security Council. He encouraged the government of the DPRK to respond positively to his offer of technical assistance. And I'm curious as to what that technical assistance might look like if the DPRK were to accept it.
Well, I mean, it's a scale, yeah, and we're dealing with a member state who has been essentially shut off for a long time and who hasn't really participated in many of these things. So we start off with very modest steps, some sort of getting together with the diplomats who have to write reports to the treaty bodies, for example, the one on disability. So getting them together to talk about what quality of data is required by the committee, how to present it, what the committee will be looking for, what sort of questions they're likely to ask, how to be prepared, those sorts of very basic steps, which we do in every country. And then, of course, the scale goes up and up and up. Ultimately, it would be very important, I think, for there to be an in-country mission on strengthening a national system of protection for human rights. Now, when you say this, people roll their eyes and say, "Oh, but it's North Korea." Well, many countries. A number of countries have been in this situation before and people have rolled their eyes. But human rights is a long-term project and we've seen remarkable progress in some places in the world, starting out quite modestly. It's a matter of getting people around the table. It really is.
Well, and that's getting people around the table is the heart of the matter, isn't it? Reading the 5-page briefing by Mr. Turk, which is very sobering, it struck me that his report ends with hopes that North Korea will reopen to the world and interact with the United Nations again. So again, that's part of that getting around the table. And it emphasizes that in situations like the DPRK, as you say, it's not the only case of its kind, the UN can really do nothing if the government of a given country doesn't want to engage. And now that North Korea is slowly reopening from its self-imposed 3.5 years of isolation, will your office and the Office of the Special Rapporteur be trying to engage with the DPRK government from a fresh start?
We already are, absolutely. And yeah, I think we've talked also about COVID, about building back globally after COVID, a bit of a fresh start. But DPRK, it's a very strong fresh start. And we would hope that the proposals we've made for working together will eventually see the light of day. Some people say, this country or that country, country A or country B, they don't really care about human rights. There's no point talking to them. And it's like, when you look at how much effort, both human and financial effort, that countries put in to not being criticized for human rights, that for me, that's an indicator of how seriously they take human rights. Yeah, both, intrinsically, meaning they feel that people have rights and they're entitled to them, or instrumentally, we want to look as though we're doing well on human rights because that'll give us credibility in other areas. So I think DPRK in that way is similar to many other countries in seeing that human rights is essential for them in moving forward.
But those efforts by the DPRK government to avoid being criticised, it's hard for me to think of anything apart from pointing the finger in the other direction at UN meetings in Geneva and New York. Are there other things that it does that you can think of in terms of expending effort and resources and trying to avoid criticism?
Well, it certainly follows absolutely everything that's done on DPRK and human rights, I think, at least what's done here between us and the government here and
so they're reading
society.
All your output.
Absolutely. They react, they put a lot of effort into reacting to things. The responses aren't just simplistic slogans. They do get into details. They might say things that we don't think are necessarily true.
Right.
But can you imagine a situation where you didn't even have that sort of engagement? If you had a country that just didn't even respond and said this is just an alien Western concept that we're not going to get involved in. When we're not there at all.
Are there any in the world that take that approach, that basically we don't even recognize the concept of human rights? It's Western imposed. We have our own concept.
No, there's not many. No, there's some armed groups, I'm sure Daesh and others are like that. But No, and this is the value of the United Nations as a normative organisation. Everyone is around the table, meaning that everyone signs on to these things in the Charter.
You said that the United Nations has a policy or a principle of always being open to engagement, but I'm wondering, and I'm sure some of our listeners are wondering too, why is suspending DPRK participation in the UN and its bodies and agencies not an option? For example, temporarily sending the DPRK diplomats home from New York, Geneva, and Vienna, and wherever.
Well, I mean, those sorts of things happen in a bilateral way between member states, yeah, and saying we're not playing ball with you anymore, so forth. With a multilateral organisation, it's built on multilateralism, meaning that what standard are you going to use, yeah? So if you say, well, our standard for deciding whether someone's been a bad person and we don't talk to them anymore is if they haven't done all their reports to the treaty bodies. Well, you'll be left with a handful of about 5 member states sitting around the table on that. It's a very, very risky race to the bottom if you start going to that extreme. But it's not as though it doesn't happen. I mean, DPRK is a subject of multilateral sanctions adopted under the UN Security Council. So those things happen. But to say, no, you don't even turn up, we're not going to talk to you anymore, that's a bridge too far for you. And that's not that's not the vision of the Charter. What happens sometimes is that if member states don't pay their dues, don't pay their money, they can lose things like voting rights and so forth. That's a very mechanical thing.
Yep.
But to say that we're not talking to you anymore, that's not the vision of the Charter.
Or what about, say, I don't know what the size of the current DPRK permanent mission to the UN in New York City is, but if, let's say they've got 24 people there and you say, well, we only see 3 people turn up to UN meetings, well, the rest can just go home and leave the other 3 here.
Well, that's not for the UN to decide. At all.
Okay. I want to move on to a report that was released by your office in March this year entitled These Wounds Do Not Heal, and it's about enforced disappearances and abductions by the DPRK. What do enforced disappearances and abductions mean here?
Well, enforced disappearances globally is, the situation where someone is taken by a state actor or with the connivance of a state, and their detention is not recognised. They don't say what happened to them, where they went, where they're held, whether they're dead or alive. They just deny knowledge. Now, the big movement in enforced disappearance law really came about during the Argentinian juntas, where we had enforced disappearance in Argentina and Chile and Uruguay and other places, were a feature of those dictatorships. Here, it's much more complex. In respect of DPRK, there's 2 major types. Yeah, one is enforced disappearance of North Korean nationals in North Korea. People going to political prison camps, just disappearing. You don't know what happened to them. Yeah, classic case. If the government said to the family, your son is in this political prison camp up here, that wouldn't be an enforced disappearance because you know where they are.
Right.
It's not just detention. It's this absolute, no, we didn't have anything to do with it. There's no information. So that's one form. The other form is foreigners, and that's where or at least people from the peninsula and foreigners. That's where it becomes very peculiar. We have the non-returned POWs from the war, 100,000. We have the non-returned, we have the civilians who were essentially kidnapped during the war, taken back with the retreating forces, they weren't soldiers, so they weren't POWs.
Right.
We had civilians taken after the war, like the Korean airliner and other things like that. We had the Japanese civilians who were abducted from Japan. We also had nationals, and this is not very well known, of probably 7 or 8 other countries, Lebanon, United States, Germany, China, who have also been abducted. So that's the contours of it here. Some have been returned, some have escaped and returned, but most of them we have no idea what happened to them. Now, it's interesting that this is the one serious human rights violation and probably crime against humanity that North Korea has admitted to. It admitted to it in respect of the Japanese.
When Kim Jong-il met with Junichiro Koizumi back in 2002.
Exactly.
So,
and they said, we'll send, yes, we had them. Yes, we're sending them back.
We've got
yes,
5 that are alive. We'll send them back.
Yeah. So that's quite peculiar.
It hasn't admitted to the other ones.
No.
Now, on Japan, I know that this report of yours was of particular interest in Japan, where you've already mentioned that, yes, some people there were simply taken while walking on the beach or on the way from school to home. And in fact, you spoke at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan in April this year on the back of that report. So I know that this issue has been in Japan for decades. And North Korea will argue that it dealt with it all back in that meeting between Kim Jong-il and Koizumi in the early 2000s. Why is it still ongoing? Have more people been abducted in Japan since, or are there some cases that are still pending?
Well, there's two issues. The first one is that, yes, we don't know how many there are. The recognised number of abductees is essentially just over a dozen, but there's up to about 800 potential others, meaning people whose disappearance can't be explained at the moment, and they could have been. Not all of them, but they could have been.
Yeah.
Certainly amongst those who were returned and the remains of those who were returned, they weren't the people they said they were, according to forensic testing. So, no, at least, and for the government of Japan, as we understand it, they feel as though this story certainly isn't over. The other side is the Paradise on Earth campaign, which is where you had an inducement to Koreans living in Japan after the war to go back to North Korea. And they
just under 100,000 of them.
Exactly. And they were shipped back on the inducement that it was indeed
Paradise on Earth, yeah.
And that wasn't the case. Now, we're not saying that they are all enforced disappearance, because maybe you could find out where they are, but certainly a large number of them will have been. And the reason we know that is because we know that foreigners who go back to Japan, even Koreans who have spent a long time abroad, are treated with suspicion. They're put in a relatively suspect social class, songbun.
You mean when they go to North Korea?
When they go to North Korea, sorry.
Right.
Yes. So, and that means they under suspicion, they can disappear, they can be banished and so forth. So all of those typologies mean we've probably got 200,000 people who have been forcibly disappeared. And under international law, the families of those who disappeared are also victims.
Right.
So we're talking millions of people impacted by this, which is why it's such a big issue, which is why we did the report.
And in writing your report, your staff conducted 80 in-depth interviews over a number of years with victims, so either the direct victims of enforced disappearances and also their relatives. So once again, I imagine that there are incredible limits in writing a report like this when you can't go to the country where these things are accused of being alleged to have happened, and the government won't talk to you about. What's the logistics of that? How do you find 80 people to talk to?
Well, if you're going to write a report from outside a country or a country where you have no access, enforced disappearance is the thing you want to write about, because you don't actually need to go into the country that much, because you're not going to find the people. What you need to do is you need to establish the facts, mainly from the family, who say, there was a story of a family in the southern province here in ROK, who said, our son, he was 19, travelled one day to another city, never came home. We had no idea what happened. And then 20 years later, someone said, who had escaped from the north, it's a long story, but said, I think I saw your son on the street in the north. So it's grabbing those sorts of stories. Now, the fact of forced disappearance is, you can establish that fairly quickly, but what's interesting, this is what we try to focus on in the report, what's tragic is the impact on the families.
Yeah.
And here the impact is very interesting. Okay, there's the despair, there's the lifelong burden, whatever happened to these people, where are they? But then also, particularly in the Republic of Korea, people came under suspicion. Oh, your son disappeared to the north. That means he probably was a spy or whatever. And the suffering of some of these families is really deserves a lot more attention.
Now, North Korea's response, as often when it's criticized in the areas of human rights, is to get very indignant and angry and complain that it's being treated unfairly. Do you see this as a tactic by the government of the DPRK? Is it complaining in good faith?
Well, sometimes there may be some basis to it, but almost every member state will do the same thing. One of the major complaints about UN work in human rights is selectivity. You're attacking us. We're seeing it now in Israel, Palestine. We're seeing it in Ukraine, Russia. We're seeing it in Yemen, Saudi. So it's not such a strange thing for us. Is it in good faith? Well, these are statements made in political fora, so they are political. Our position is that the best way to move forward on this issue and to maintain the objectivity of monitoring, including UN monitoring, is to give us access, and so we can have a look and see and verify things.
Were there any abductees who escaped who were directly interviewed for this report?
Yes, particularly some of the POWs who escaped back, yes.
Okay, and they've certainly gone through a decades-long ordeal, haven't they?
The stories are unbelievable.
Yeah.
Essentially young people who then all of a sudden had war, having a relatively normal life, then war visited upon them, then the horrors of war, then decades of being trapped in the north, and then the journey coming here, and then coming back here, and many of them are annoyed, feeling like they weren't recognised when they came back here. So what a story, incredible stuff.
Yeah, and you've already talked about just the diversity of the typology of people who have been abducted and disappeared. We've got the South Korean soldiers and civilians from the war. We've got the South Korean fishermen, the crew of the airline that was hijacked, the Japanese citizens, the citizens of other countries like the Lebanese woman who was abducted and given to an American defector in marriage. Such a diversity there in terms of origins and how and where and why they were abducted. Is there anything that unites them, that brings all these cases together?
Well, what's interesting is that the common factor that's usually there isn't there. So enforced disappearance in Argentina and Chile back in the day, in Syria much more recently, and other places, enforced disappearance is usually used as a way to spread terror amongst the population. It comes from Nazi Germany, the Nebel und Nacht, I think it is, when they perfected it. It was just making people disappear into the fog.
Right.
Now here, in terms of North Koreans being forcibly disappeared now, yes, maybe that's part of it, but they weren't doing this to spread fear amongst the Japanese population or the South Korean population or the Lebanese population. It was a much more instrumentalized.
Yeah.
We wanted Japanese teachers.
Right.
We wanted wives for American servicemen who had defected. We wanted laborers for whatever. We wanted smart people to help with setting up the state, which is, as I understand it, the civilians who were essentially kidnapped by the retreating armies during the war. Those civilians were professors and doctors, and so it was brain power, sometimes brawn, but mainly brain power to build the state. So it's a very different place to other contexts.
I just see here in my notes belatedly that last week was actually the 64th anniversary of the first boat departing from Japan carrying the Zainichi Koreans to in that Paradise on Earth campaign. So, yeah, it's amazing how long-lived some of these things are, right? I mean, even in South America, the juntas eventually went away, and then people were able to talk about them publicly. But here we are, 64 years since the Zainichi, 70-plus years since the prisoners of war.
We were at the event last week in Niigata. We spoke at it. It's what you say is absolutely right, and this is why there's urgency, because the people who were disappeared, their families, and the perpetrators are all now in their 80s and 90s for many of these.
Yeah, if they're alive at all.
So, and the other interesting thing about the Japanese one is that the abductions and the Paradise on Earth were both centered on departures from generally Niigata, this one town on the west coast.
Now, Chapter 6 of your report, These Wounds Do Not Heal, the chapter is called Victims' Perspectives on Truth, Justice, including accountability and reparations for violations suffered as a result of enforced disappearances, a long chapter title. It's got 8 subsections of wishes that the victims and their families express vis-a-vis the DPRK government, all the way up to prosecuting the supreme leader. And it was sad going through that chapter because it really felt like, at this stage at least, there's little to no hope that any of these wishes will ever be fulfilled as long as the current leadership of the DPRK is in place. And if ever there is some form of systemic change or deep reform in North Korea, the new people in charge will be unlikely to take responsibility for these matters that happened before them. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't see it exactly the same way. First of all, we're talking about victims of human rights violations, and they're entitled to remedy and reparation. So we see accountability in 2 ways. One is judicial accountability, holding perpetrators to account. Now, we do a lot of work on that. There's not a lot of pathways at the moment that are immediately available for the short to mid-term. I don't see prosecutions happening in the next few years. But that's been the case everywhere, and I think eventually there will be, particularly around unification. But after, there could be, we've seen in other places, Syria, Nepal, other places where people have been prosecuted. But the other side of it is non-judicial accountability, which means giving some form of accountability to victims that doesn't involve criminal law. So, and that's what memorialization, recognition, compensation, truth-telling. These are things that lie in the power of other member states, not just the DPRK. And we have it happening here. We have a number of proposals for memorials here now in museums. We have
2 people who were abducted to the north. Okay.
Yes, we have the government moving on the issue of recognition, particularly in terms of the former servicemen. There has been compensation schemes here already. And some people say to me, "Hold on, why should ROK compensate? There's DPRK's crime." Well, you know what? When you've got a victim in front of you, they're still suffering. You don't just say, "Sorry, I'm not the person." It doesn't work like that. So that's why, for example, the compensation given out by the International Criminal Court in the cases of like Côte d'Ivoire or whatever, that didn't come from the state or the warlord. It came from the fund the court has set up. So one of the things we're saying is that fund should be set up so it can provide some sort of modicum of compensation.
Yeah.
Now, there are some things on which this country and other countries are responsible. So I mentioned before people who were put under surveillance by the security services and couldn't find a job and whatever because their brother disappeared. That's the responsibility of the ROK.
Yeah.
But beyond that, what our interviews showed is that yes, people want accountability. They want to see Kim Jong-un or the leadership or someone before a court. But many of them, particularly for this crime, they want to know what happened to their loved one. They just want to know. That's what they say. I want the remains back so I can give them the burial we always wanted to give Dad or whatever. And I want recognition. I don't want to be this person in the shadows where in the neighborhood where everyone says, that their daughter disappeared or whatever. And that happens everywhere. In Japan, we heard this story as well, where I remember speaking to the brothers of Megumi, the most famous Japanese abductee, saying, people made fun of them because when just immediately after it happened, because the sense was, she's just disappeared and gone and I don't know, married some guy up north or something. So
a teenage runaway.
Yeah, so all that you can't compensate everything, but you can at least recognize it.
Yeah. It seems to me that there's a risk here in the Republic of Korea that, given the way that political swings occur right now, the government's certainly taking a firmer stance on North Korea, so it would be more, I think, open to having a memorial or creating a fund or doing whatever. But then, if another government on the other side of politics comes in, that they may be inclined to put a stop to that, because that tends to be what happens, right? That defected refugees from North Korea are either encouraged or discouraged to speak openly, depending on which party is in the presidential office at the time. Yeah,
well, I mean, I've only been here under this administration, and we work with the Republic of Korea. Not it doesn't matter what the government is,
right?
And as I understand, we also had not much of an impact on our work under the previous administration, but nationally, that happens in many places on human rights. That's often the key political issues that are dividing political parties these days, as people try to say they're culture wars. They're really questions of rights. But I would hope that these things will be sustainable. I would hope that the actors here and in other countries look at what's happened elsewhere in the world, because we're not pulling this out of thin air. This is what we've had in South Africa, in Colombia, in many countries have been through these processes, which are essentially transitional, a part of transitional justice. Yeah.
And at the end of the report, your own office lists, I think, a bunch of recommendations that are starting with 12 exhortations to the government of the DPRK. I haven't yet seen any movement by the DPRK in response to this in the 9 months or so since the report came out. Have you? Do you know if they've read the report and if they've responded to it?
They would certainly have read the report. There was an initial brief response. It really is, 9 months is an extremely short time in human rights terms. In many places, if there was an egregious situation and you wanted, some immediate injunction on something, it could happen. But in almost all countries, even legislative reform takes much longer than that. So we're hopeful. I realise that it might sound a bit pie in the sky to expect change quickly, but that's not the only purpose of the report. The report is also documentation. It's saying this is what happened, this is what we found, and everyone's fixed with knowledge about it. No one can say we didn't know about this in the future.
And on that point there, James, do you ever get the feeling that maybe you and your office and your colleagues are chroniclers, early historians, writing down things that can't be fixed, but at least they won't be forgotten?
That's a big part of the work, and we know that from countless other situations. The human rights work that we and particularly the civil society organisations do here, it's in some way it's frustrating and thankless work, but it's essential because it's so easy. We know it's so easy to deny what happened in the past and say, well, sorry, that prove it.
Yeah. It's
also on the side of the accountability work. So collecting evidence and information for a possible future trial. It is interesting work, but it's very it's quite a hard grind, because you're waiting for a prosecutor to turn up at the door saying, actually, you know what, I want to start a case.
Right.
If they don't turn up, you're just doing it for years and years and years. But when it does happen, it'll be key, I think. I hope.
How much longer do you have in this position?
Probably another 3 years.
What do you want to see done during the rest of your time here?
Well, I'd like to see us be doing more work with this issue of accountability to try to make sure that everyone's on the same line about what's feasible and what's not feasible, because we're always nervous about raising expectations amongst victims and so forth. We'd like to look into some more specific areas of human rights. I think an area, for example, of children hasn't been looked into enough. We've said that we want to look at the links between human rights and peace and security, because that's the engine of the international debate on the peninsula is peace and security. So how can we look at the human rights side of things on that? And I'd like to contribute to having a bigger profile for DPRK by having more involvement by North Koreans in everything we do. And when I say we, I mean all of us on DPRK. There's 33,000 escapees in this country. And so I can't see a reason why, for example, you would have anything, an event or anything, without a North Korean in the room. It's a bit like the old nothing about us without us.
Right. You mentioned peace and security. You mentioned about the securitization of human rights, the linking of human rights to weapons of mass destruction and other issues?
What I've discovered is that it is a very understudied area. And when you say it, it sounds simple, but it means many different things to many different people. And it's not clear exactly what we're all talking about. So for some people, linking it is saying, children having to participate in the harvest in the north as a form of forced labor, that contributes to missiles. And then others say, hold on, these missiles cost $15 million. It's tiny. Right. That link is so tenuous. It's nice to say it. Others say, well, it's all cybercrime that does it. It's not human rights that funds militarization. It's not human rights abuse. Others say, well, it's only about the nuclear program and not about the broader militarization army program. I think we're still trying to tease out exactly what it means. But certainly the very basic links about the use of resources for militarization has to be looked into. But also the way the sort of militarized society, what that means for women and children, for example, and also for men who have to do these very long years of service. In human rights terms, there's a lot to unpack in there, what's needed. And I think that the gendered aspects, women being the wheels of the revolution behind the men who are it's their gender and human rights issues to be addressed in every country. So I think there's a lot to unpack in there. And I would hope that next time a missile goes off that we're not just talking about peace and security, but we're also mentioning the human rights aspect.
Well, I wish you good luck with your endeavours there at the United Nations Office for the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Seoul. Thank you very much for coming on the NK News podcast today, James Heenan.
Thanks, Jack. It's my pleasure.
Listeners, you can find James and his office online on the Twitter at UN Rights Seoul. We'll add a link in the show notes, and also to the report that we talked about earlier there, These Wounds Do Not Heal. Thank you very much. Ever feel overwhelmed with the complexity of trying to understand what's going on with North Korea? Don't fret, NK Pro is here to help. Built on the strong reputation of NK News, NK Pro combines decades of experience with cutting-edge technology to offer the best in North Korea-related information. Here's the deal. You get daily analysis and exclusive news, along with amazing research tools that let you tap into a vast range of open-source North Korean information, such as state media search and data extraction, real-time ship and aircraft movement tracking, and A to Z directories of people, companies, and organizations inside and outside the company. Yes, you heard that right. NK Pro is perfect for those in policy, business, and research who need quality, reliable, and timely insights. It's not just about staying informed, it's about understanding the key signals that can change the course of the future. So why wait? Dive deep into the realm of North Korea with NK Pro and navigate the landscape like a pro. After all, knowledge is power. Interested? Visit nknews.org/professionals to claim your free 30-day trial of NK Pro. Once again, that's nknews.org/professionals. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our podcast episode for today. Our thanks go to Brian Betts and Alana Hill for facilitating this episode, And to our post-recording producer genius Gabby Magnuson, who cuts out all the extraneous noises, awkward silences, bodily functions, and fixes the audio levels. Thank you, and listen again next time.